In the bustling heart of Chicago, Emma is a mother determined to build a better life for her 11-year-old son, Alex. But behind the doors of their small apartment, shadows of fear and control loom, threatening to dim the light in their lives. After losing her beloved husband, Jack, 3 years ago, Emma's journey has been marked by heartbreak, sacrifice, and survival. Yet, through it all, she has held on to one unwavering truth: Alex deserves a life filled with safety, love, and freedom. When the quiet tension at home reaches a breaking point, Emma faces a choice that will change everything. With nothing but her courage and a mother's instinct, she steps into the unknown, seeking refuge in a shelter where strangers offer unexpected kindness and new opportunities. As she navigates an unfamiliar path, Emma discovers her own resilience, drawing strength from memories of Jack and from Alex's unshakable faith in her. But rebuilding their lives is not easy. Old fears and new challenges arise, testing Emma's resolve at every turn. Can she truly break free from the past and build a home where she and Alex can thrive? And when hope finally begins to bloom, will she trust in her ability to create a future filled with the joy and stability they've longed for? The fading light of an October evening in Chicago settled over the narrow street where Emma's apartment stood, tucked between a small corner store and a boarded-up laundromat. From her kitchen window, Emma watched the last streaks of gold dissolve into gray, the cold hum of the city rising like a distant pulse. The breeze carried the scent of wet concrete and dry leaves, a signal that winter was on its way. She rubbed her hands together, her fingers aching from the early chill that seeped through the apartment walls. The small two-bedroom unit felt more like a drafty box than a home. Paint peeled near the windows, and the radiator clanked uselessly. The hum of the old refrigerator was the only constant sound, filling the silence like a reminder of their reality. Emma glanced at the worn dining table in the center of the room, where her 11-year-old son, Alex, sat quietly with his schoolbooks spread out before him. His blonde curls fell in soft waves over his forehead, and his blue eyes, Jack's eyes, were focused somewhere far away. His pencil lay untouched. "How is your homework coming along?" Emma asked gently, stepping closer. Alex shrugged. "It's almost done," he mumbled. Emma's heart ached at the dullness in his voice. At 11, Alex carried a kind of quiet sadness that did not belong in a boy so young. She reached over and brushed a hand against his arm, and that was when she saw it, the faint shadow of a bruise just below his elbow. She felt her breath catch in her throat. "What happened?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm. Alex shifted in his seat and pulled his sleeve down. "It's nothing. I bumped it during gym class." Emma knew that wasn't the full story, but before she could press further, the jangle of keys at the door made her tense. The front door opened, and David entered, shaking the chill off his coat. He carried a takeout cup of coffee and a folded newspaper. "Evening," he said flatly. Emma forced a smile. "Good evening," she replied. David placed the coffee and newspaper on the table and pulled out a chair. He glanced at Alex, who immediately lowered his gaze and pretended to read. Emma noticed the way Alex's shoulders tensed, as if bracing for something. David sat down with an air of control, tapping the edge of the table. "I spoke to Mr. Harris today," he began. "His brother needs someone to help at his cafe. I told him you would be interested." Emma nodded, hiding the frustration bubbling beneath her calm. "Thank you," she said quietly. David's gaze sharpened. "Make sure you make a good impression," he added. "This could be a chance for something stable." Emma nodded again, though she wanted to tell him she would prefer to choose her own path. But the rent loomed over her like a weight she could not lift alone. David took a sip of coffee and turned to the newspaper, dismissing them both with the rustling sound of the pages. Alex picked up his pencil and started scribbling half-heartedly, his small hand tightening around it. Emma watched her son, guilt pressing in on her like a stone. The years had been so hard on him. He had lost Jack, His father, too soon before Alex could fully understand what it meant to have a dad who loved him without limits. Now, it was just the two of them, navigating a world where safety felt like a fragile, distant thing. The quiet grew heavy, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. Emma glanced at the window, where the city lights blinked like distant beacons. She took a slow breath and whispered a silent promise to herself. This is not forever. I will find a way to give Alex the life he deserves. The morning light broke pale and gray over the city. Emma sat at the small kitchen table, watching the steam rise from her coffee. The apartment was still and quiet, but her mind raced with everything that lay ahead. She thought of the cafe job David had mentioned and felt a familiar knot of anxiety form in her chest. She needed the income, there was no denying that, but the thought of him deciding her path made her feel like a bird trapped in a cage. Her thoughts drifted to Jack, as they so often did in moments like this. She remembered the mornings they spent together before the world took him away. They would sit by the window, talking about everything and nothing while the sun warmed their backs. "We'll carve out our place," Jack would say, with a quiet certainty that made her believe it, even when times were hard. The creak of a door pulled Emma from her memories. Alex shuffled into the kitchen, still in his wrinkled pajamas, his eyes puffy with sleep. He rubbed his arm absent-mindedly, the same arm with the bruise, and Emma felt a pang of worry again. "Good morning, sweetheart," she greeted him, pouring him a glass of milk. Alex slid into his chair and blinked up at her. "Morning," he murmured, his voice still soft with sleep. Emma sat down across from him. She wanted to ask again about the bruise, but she could see the tiredness in his face, the way he avoided her eyes. Instead, she reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair away from his forehead. "Did you sleep okay?" she asked. Alex shrugged. "I guess." Emma hesitated, remembering something Jack had once said. When he's quiet, he's thinking. Let him find his words. She swallowed her instinct to press him, and instead reached for a fresh piece of bread. She buttered it slowly and set it in front of Alex. "You've got a big day today," she said, keeping her tone light. "It's picture day at school, right?" Alex nodded as he reached for the bread. He took a small bite, chewing slowly. "I miss Dad," he said quietly. Emma felt the air leave her lungs. "Me too," she whispered. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant noise of cars passing on the street below. Emma stood and walked over to Alex, kneeling beside him. She gently straightened his collar and smoothed the crease in his sleeve. "I believe in you," she said softly. Alex's eyes flickered with emotion, but he didn't say anything more. He simply leaned into her, his small shoulder pressing against her arm. She stayed there with him for a moment, drawing strength from his quiet presence. Later, Emma walked Alex to school, as she always did. The morning air was sharp, and the sky overhead was a pale wash of gray. The neighborhood was waking up, shop owners raising metal shutters, buses groaning to a halt at street corners. Emma held Alex's hand as they walked, and she could feel the slight tension in his fingers, the way he gripped her hand just a little too tightly. When they reached the school gates, Alex hesitated. He adjusted the strap of his backpack and looked up at her with a serious expression. "Will you be okay today, Mom?" he asked. Emma smiled, though her throat felt tight. "Of course, mi amor," she said. "You don't need to worry about me." Alex nodded slowly and gave her a quick hug before turning to head inside. Emma watched him until the school doors closed behind him, then stood there for a few seconds longer, gathering her breath. The walk back to the apartment felt longer somehow. The familiar streets looked the same, the cracked sidewalks, the corner store with its neon open sign flickering in the window, but Emma felt heavier with each step. She knew what waited for her at home. David's plans, his expectations, the life she hadn't chosen but had accepted out of necessity. When she stepped back inside the apartment, the quiet was almost overwhelming. The empty space pressed down on her, filled with reminders of what they had lost. She placed her hands on the counter, closed her eyes, and took a slow breath. "I have to do this for Alex," she whispered to herself. "No matter what." Her eyes drifted to the corkboard near the door, where she kept important phone numbers and notes. Pinned next to an overdue utility bill was a scrap of paper with the cafe manager's name, Lisa Harris, and a phone number scrawled beneath it in David's neat handwriting. Emma reached for the phone, her hand trembling slightly. She knew what this meant, another step further into a life where David held the reins. But she also knew she couldn't afford to wait for a better option that might never come. She dialed the number, her heart pounding with every ring. A brisk voice answered. "This is Lisa Harris." Emma cleared her throat, willing her voice to sound steady. "Good morning. My name is Emma. I was told you might be looking for someone to help at your cafe." There was a pause, then Lisa's voice softened slightly. "Yes, Mr. Harris mentioned you. Can you come in today for a quick interview?" Emma swallowed hard. "Yes, I can." "Good," Lisa replied. "We're near Logan Square. I'll see you at 11. Emma hung up and stared at the phone for a moment. The next step was set in motion, and there was no turning back now. She moved to the bedroom, choosing a simple but neat blouse and brushing her long hair into a tidy ponytail. She looked at her reflection in the small mirror above the dresser. Her face looked older than she remembered, lines of worry etched around her eyes. But there was a flicker of determination there too. She took another breath, steadied her nerves, and reached for her coat. The morning was cold, but Emma felt a warmth grow inside her. She had taken the first step, however small. "One step at a time," she whispered, echoing Jack's words. She walked out the door, the promise of a new beginning somewhere just ahead. Emma's breath hung in small puffs as she walked down the cracked sidewalk toward Logan Square. The cold morning air nipped at her cheeks, but she barely noticed it. Her thoughts spun like the passing traffic, fast and restless. She had spent the entire walk replaying what she would say, rehearsing the details of her experience at the diner, though she knew the truth was simple: she needed this job. Logan Square felt like another world compared to her quiet neighborhood. The streets here were lined with small cafes and boutique shops, their windows filled with pastries, books, and art. A group of friends laughed together as they left a coffee shop, steam rising from their cups. For a moment, Emma felt out of place. Her modest coat and worn shoes stood in stark contrast to the polished world around her. But she shook off the doubt and pressed forward. The cafe Lisa had mentioned was tucked between a record store and a flower shop. The windows were spotless, though the "Opening Soon" sign taped to the glass was slightly crooked. Emma paused, taking in the aroma of freshly ground coffee that drifted out each time the door opened. She took one steadying breath before stepping inside. The cafe was bright and warm, with exposed brick walls and soft hanging lights. Stacks of coffee beans and jars of tea were arranged neatly on shelves behind the counter. There was a buzz of movement as workers unpacked boxes and wiped down tables. In the midst of it all stood Lisa Harris, clipboard in hand. Lisa's sharp eyes met Emma's as she approached the counter. She was a tall woman in her early 40s, with short, dark hair and a posture that spoke of efficiency. She nodded as Emma stepped forward. "You must be Emma," Lisa said, extending her hand. Emma shook it firmly. "Yes, thank you for meeting with me." Lisa gestured toward a small table by the window. "Let's sit." Emma followed and settled into the chair, smoothing her coat over her lap. The cafe noise faded into the background as Lisa flipped a page on her clipboard. "Mr. Harris told me you have experience working at a diner," Lisa began. "Tell me about that." Emma straightened her shoulders. "Yes, I worked the morning shift at Lucy's Diner for 3 years. I managed the orders, handled the cash register, and helped with closing duties when we were short-staffed." Lisa nodded. "What made you leave?" Emma hesitated, but only for a moment. "The diner closed last year," The owner retired, and I have been taking on temporary jobs since then to make ends meet. Lisa's pen scratched across the page as she made notes. She didn't look up, but her voice softened. And what makes you want to work here? Emma's eyes drifted toward the window, where passers-by hurried along the street with their scarves pulled tight. She thought of Alex at school, sitting at his desk, trying to focus despite everything. She turned back to Lisa, her voice quiet but steady. I want to build something stable for my son and me. I'm hardworking, and I'm eager to learn. I know how to make customers feel welcome. And I need a fresh start. Lisa finally looked up, meeting Emma's gaze with a thoughtful expression. For a moment, there was silence. Then Lisa closed her clipboard. Reliability is everything in this business, Lisa said. We need someone who can handle the morning rush, who will be here on time and stay calm under pressure. Are you willing to take a part-time position to start? Emma nodded. Yes, of course. Lisa leaned back slightly, folding her arms. One more thing, are you bilingual? Emma blinked in surprise. Yes, I speak both English and Spanish. A small smile tugged at the corner of Lisa's mouth. Good. Our neighborhood is changing, and I want this cafe to feel welcoming to everyone. Emma felt a flicker of hope. Lisa rose and extended her hand again. Let's give it a try, Lisa said. You can start part-time next week. If things go well, we'll talk about full-time. Emma's heart swelled with relief as she stood and shook Lisa's hand. Thank you so much. I won't let you down. Lisa gave her a nod before turning toward the barista to check on something, leaving Emma standing there for a moment. She took it all in, the warm lighting, the hum of the espresso machine, the cheerful clink of mugs, and let herself believe, for the first time in a long while, that things might be turning around. As Emma stepped back outside, the cold air rushed to greet her, but it could not dampen the warmth in her chest. She pulled her coat tighter and hurried down the street, eager to get back to the apartment and share the news with Alex. The afternoon sun had broken through the clouds, casting golden patches on the sidewalk. Her thoughts were full of possibilities, how the extra income could help them catch up on rent, how she could start building the future she had promised Alex. For the first time in months, she felt like she was moving towards something, not just trying to survive. When she reached their building, she spotted Alex sitting on the front steps, his backpack hugged to his chest. She felt a pang of guilt. He had beaten her home. She had wanted to be there first, to show him that he was not alone. Hey, buddy, Emma called softly as she approached. I'm sorry I'm late. Alex looked up and smiled a real smile, not the small guarded ones he usually gave. It's okay, Mom. Did it go well? Emma sat beside him and put an arm around his shoulders. It went better than I hoped. I got the job part-time for now, but it's a start. Alex's eyes lit up and he leaned into her. I'm proud of you, he whispered. Emma blinked back tears and pressed a kiss to the top of his head. For the first time in a long while, hope felt tangible, not just something distant and fragile. They sat together in the golden afternoon light, mother and son, sharing the quiet joy of a new beginning. The warmth of hope from the cafe interview stayed with Emma as she climbed the narrow staircase of their apartment building, Alex's small hand tucked into hers. The hum of passing cars and distant voices filtered in through the drafty hallway windows. Emma took comfort in the simple feeling of Alex leaning against her side. When they reached their apartment door, Emma unlocked it and stepped inside. The space smelled faintly of leftover rice and beans from the night before. The morning sun had shifted, casting long shadows across the scuffed floorboards. Alex set his backpack down by the dining table and turned to Emma, his eyes searching her face. Do you think this new job will be enough? He asked quietly. Emma crouched to meet his gaze, brushing a hand through his curls. It's a start, she said, and sometimes a start is all you need. Alex gave a small nod, the tension in his shoulders easing just a little. He reached for his homework, but Emma could tell he was still lingering in his thoughts. She wished she could take away all his worries, but she knew the only way to do that was to keep moving forward. The sound of keys jingling outside the door made them both freezes. A moment later, the door swung open, and David walked in, still wearing his office coat. His hair was slightly mussed, and his face was tight, with the familiar expression Emma had learned to dread the look he wore when he wanted control. David dropped his briefcase on the floor and eyed them both. "I'm home earlier than usual," he said, his voice neutral but sharp beneath the surface. "How did it go at the cafe?" Emma straightened, keeping her tone even. "It went well. Lisa offered me a part-time position to start." David raised an eyebrow and crossed his arms. "Part-time? That's it?" Emma forced herself to hold his gaze. "Yes, it's a step forward. I'll still pick up shifts at the diner until I'm working more hours." David exhaled through his nose, an almost imperceptible sign of disapproval. "You'll need to impress her if you want to move up," he said. "You can't afford to mess this up, Emma." A flicker of anger sparked in Emma's chest, but she kept it buried beneath a steady exterior. "I know," she replied simply. David walked over to the table and placed his hand on Alex's homework, as if inspecting it. Alex tensed but didn't say anything. David's gaze shifted between them, his silence carrying a subtle weight that filled the room. "You should make dinner," David said, turning toward the hallway. "I'll be in the room." Emma's jaw clenched, but she gave a small nod. David disappeared down the hall, the door closing behind him with a soft click that felt louder than it was. She turned to Alex and saw the worry etched into his face. She forced herself to smile and ran her hand down his back. "How about you finish that reading while I cook?" Alex nodded and sat down, but the brightness he had shown earlier was dimmed again. Emma moved around the small kitchen, chopping onions and peppers for a simple stir-fry. The familiar rhythm of cooking helped calm her. The sizzling of oil in the pan, the smell of garlic, it was something she could control. As she stirred the vegetables, her mind wandered to the future. She thought of the cafe, the way Lisa had looked at her with something almost like understanding. It felt like a small thread of connection, one Emma desperately wanted to hold on to. She thought of Jack's voice, so steady and sure, reminding her of their strength during those early years in the city. "You're stronger than you think," he had said once, when she had struggled with homesickness and loneliness. "You belong here." Dinner was quiet but calm. Alex talked a little about school, about how his teacher had started a project on astronomy. When he mentioned how they would be learning about constellations, his eyes lit up briefly. Emma smiled. "Your dad loves stargazing," she said. "He used to say that the stars were like little reminders that we're never really alone." Alex looked down at his plate, a soft smile tugging at his lips. "I remember," he said quietly. They finished dinner, cleaned up, and settled into their routine. Alex worked on his homework while Emma reviewed her schedule for the next day. She had to balance 2 shifts until she could build enough hours at the cafe, but it was worth it if it meant moving forward. Later that night, after Alex had gone to bed, Emma sat at the small kitchen table alone. She could hear the faint rumble of the city outside, the L train rushing past in the distance. The apartment was dim, lit only by the soft glow of the hallway light. Emma exhaled slowly and let her shoulders drop. She thought of the way David's words had pressed down on her earlier, how they always carried the weight of judgment. She thought of how Alex had looked at her when David spoke, his quiet fear barely hidden beneath his calm. A clattering noise in the hallway outside startled her, and her heart leapt in her chest. But when she listened closely, she realized it was just the neighbor fiddling with their keys. She pressed a hand to her chest, willing her heartbeat to slow. "I can't live like this," she whispered. The thought felt sharp and real as it echoed in the quiet. She didn't want Alex to grow up in an apartment filled with fear and silence. She wanted him to know safety and warmth. She wanted him to believe in happiness again. As she sat there, a memory surfaced: Jack kneeling beside Alex when he was just a little boy, helping him lace his first pair of soccer cleats. Jack had looked up at her with that easy smile of his. "We face what comes, step by step," he had said. Emma held on to that thought as she rose from her chair and checked on Alex. He was curled up under his blanket, breathing softly. She tucked the covers around him and kissed his forehead. "I'll get us there," she whispered. The hum of the radiator filled the room, steady and soft. Emma lay down in her own bed, willing herself to rest. Tomorrow was coming, and she had taken the first step toward something new. But she knew there would be more challenges ahead. She closed her eyes and let the memory of Jack's voice wrap around her like a shield. Emma woke to the sound of Alex stirring in the next room, his small feet padding across the floor. The early light filtered through the thin curtains, pale and gray. She rubbed the sleep from her eyes and swung her legs over the side of the bed. Her body ached from the long hours at the diner, but she pushed herself to her feet, driven by the thought of what lay ahead. Today was her first shift at the cafe. She stepped into the kitchen to find Alex sitting at the table with his school uniform already on, his hair messy, but his eyes more alert than usual. "Good morning, sweetheart," she greeted, ruffling his hair. Alex offered her a faint smile. "Morning, Mom." Emma poured him a bowl of cereal and sat across from him, savoring the quiet moment. The routine of breakfast, the clink of the spoon, it grounded her. "You'll do great today," Alex said suddenly, his voice small but certain. Emma felt her heart squeeze with emotion. "Thanks, mi amor. That means a lot." The sound of the bedroom door opening interrupted them. David stepped out, adjusting his tie. His eyes swept over the room, and his expression was unreadable as he grabbed his coat from the chair. "Your first day at the cafe," David said, his voice clipped. "Make sure you're not late." Emma nodded, unwilling to let him see how his words unsettled her. David walked to the door, then paused, glancing back. "And keep your phone on. I want to make sure you're handling things." Emma forced a polite smile. "Of course." The door closed behind him with a click that seemed louder in the silence that followed. Alex stared at his bowl, and Emma exhaled slowly, determined to stay calm for her son's sake. Later that morning, Emma walked Alex to school as usual. The air was brisk, and the leaves on the sidewalk crunched beneath their feet. At the school gate, Alex turned to her with a lingering look of concern. "Will you pick me up today?" he asked. Emma nodded, kneeling to adjust his scarf. "I'll be there. Don't worry." Alex's shoulders relaxed slightly as he gave her a quick hug. "Good luck, Mom." Emma watched as he disappeared through the school doors, her heart filled with a bittersweet warmth. He was trying so hard to be brave, even when the weight of their life pressed on his small shoulders. The cafe was already bustling when Emma arrived. The scent of fresh coffee and pastries filled the air, and the soft hum of conversation surrounded her. Lisa waved her over from behind the counter, already in motion as she handed a to-go cup to a customer. "You made it," Lisa said, offering Emma an approving nod. "Grab an apron. The morning rush is about to start." Emma slipped on the apron and moved behind the counter. Within minutes, she was taking orders, refilling coffee pots, and wiping down tables. The cafe was busy, and the rhythm of the work reminded her of the diner. She fell into step with the flow, her nervousness fading as she focused on each customer's order. Lisa watched from the register, occasionally offering a nod of encouragement. By mid-morning, Emma was beginning to feel a sense of calm. She handed a latte to a young woman in a scarf and smiled. "Have a great day." The woman returned the smile. "You too." Emma felt the smallest flicker of pride. She was doing it one small step at a time. After her shift ended, Emma hurried to pick Alex up from school. The crisp afternoon light cast long shadows across the street as she waited by the gate. When Alex emerged, his face brightened at the sight of her. "You're here," he said, running up to her. Of course I am, Emma replied, pulling him into a hug. They walked home together, their footsteps falling in sync. Emma told Alex about her shift, the friendly customers, the way Lisa had smiled when she handled a complicated order without hesitation. Alex listened, his face thoughtful. See? I knew you'd be good at it. Emma laughed softly. Well, I was nervous. But you did it anyway, Alex said, his voice proud. When they reached their building, Emma spotted David's car parked outside. Her chest tightened, but she kept her expression neutral as they climbed the stairs. She pushed the door open and immediately noticed the tension in the air. David was seated on the couch, his arms crossed. You're late, David said, though she was right on time. Emma felt Alex press close to her, his small hand gripping her sleeve. I'm not late, she replied, her voice calm. David's gaze darkened as he stood. I called you earlier. Why didn't you answer? Emma's heart raced as she remembered her phone had been in her bag while she took orders. I was working. I couldn't stop during the rush. David took a slow step forward. His tone sharpened. I told you to keep your phone on. Alex's grip on her sleeve tightened. Emma shifted slightly, placing herself between David and Alex. I'm not a machine, David, she said, her voice steady despite the fear rising in her chest. I was doing my job. David's eyes narrowed, and for a long moment, the room felt like a coiled spring. Then he let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. You're hopeless, he muttered, before storming into the bedroom and slamming the door shut. The sound made Alex flinch. Emma knelt and wrapped her arms around him. It's okay, she whispered, holding him close. Alex's voice was small. Why is he like that? Emma pulled back to meet his gaze. Because he doesn't know how to be kind, she said softly. But you do. You know how to be strong and good. Alex blinked up at her, his blue eyes filled with unspoken questions. You don't have to be afraid, Emma said, brushing her hand over his hair. We're going to be okay. Alex nodded slowly, though the worry lingered in his eyes. That night, after Alex had gone to bed, Emma sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the phone in her hand. She could still feel the tension from David's anger, the way his words lingered like a shadow. This can't be our life anymore. Her fingers hovered over the screen before she dialed a familiar number, the local shelter hotline she had saved months ago but had never dared to call. A calm voice answered. Safe Haven Shelter. How can I help you? Emma's throat tightened, but she forced herself to speak. I need help, she whispered. And with those words, something inside her shifted. Fear began to unravel, replaced by something stronger. The calm, steady voice on the other end of the line felt like a lifeline. Take your time, the woman said gently. You're safe with me. Can you tell me your name? Emma swallowed hard, her voice trembling. Emma. Hi, Emma. My name is Grace. How can we help you today? The simplicity of the question nearly undid her. She closed her eyes, trying to keep her composure. It's my son and me, she said quietly. We're not safe. I need somewhere to go. Grace's voice remained soothing. You're doing the right thing. We can help. Are you in immediate danger? Emma glanced down the hall, where the bedroom door was shut tight. She could still feel the weight of David's anger pressing into the walls. Not right now, she whispered, but I don't want to wait until it's too late. There was a pause, followed by the sound of typing. We have space available at the shelter. I can arrange transportation for you and your son, or you can come on your own if it's safer that way. Emma nodded, even though Grace couldn't see her. I can come on my own. Okay, Emma. I'll give you the address and tell you exactly what to bring. The shelter is secure, and we have staff on site 24/7. You'll have privacy and support for both you and your son. Emma jotted down the information, her hand shaking slightly as she scribbled on the back of a receipt. When she hung up, the air in the room felt different, like a storm had passed, but left the sky unsettled. She folded the paper carefully and slid it into her coat pocket. The next morning, Emma woke before dawn. The apartment was still and dim, the first light of the sun barely visible through the curtains. She packed quietly, folding only what was necessary: some clothes for Alex, a few important documents, and a small photo of Jack that she kept by her bedside. She didn't need much. What mattered most was that they would be free. Alex woke as she was zipping her bag. He sat up, blinking sleepily. "Mom?" Emma walked over to his bed and knelt beside him. "Mijo, we're leaving today." Alex's brows furrowed. "Leaving? Where are we going?" Emma took his small hand in hers. "Somewhere safe. Just you and me." Alex stared at her for a long moment before nodding. "Okay." His voice was soft but certain, as though he had known deep down that this day was coming. They left before David woke, their footsteps soft as they descended the creaking staircase. The early morning streets were quiet, save for the occasional sound of a delivery truck or a car passing by. Emma held Alex's hand tightly as they walked toward the bus stop. She felt the cold air biting at her face, but her heart beat with something close to hope. The shelter was a modest brick building with a discreet entrance, tucked between an old pharmacy and a bakery. Emma hesitated at the door, her nerves making her fingers hesitate on the handle. Then Alex squeezed her hand, and she remembered why they were there. They stepped inside, where the warm scent of coffee and the soft hum of voices greeted them. A woman with kind eyes and a clipboard approached them. "You must be Emma," the woman said, extending her hand. "I'm Grace. We spoke on the phone." Emma nodded, her voice catching. "Yes." Grace crouched slightly, so she was at eye level with Alex. "Hi, Alex. I'm Grace. We've got a room ready for you and your mom, and I'll show you around if that's okay." Alex looked up at Emma, and she gave him a reassuring nod. He nodded back and smiled faintly at Grace. They followed her down a quiet hallway lined with framed photos of flowers and handwritten messages of encouragement. "You are stronger than your circumstances," one sign read. "Every step forward is progress." The room Grace led them to was small but cozy. There were two neatly made twin beds, a dresser, and a soft lamp that cast a warm glow. Emma set her bag down and exhaled, the weight of the past few days finally lifting. Grace sat down on a chair near the door. "We'll get you settled in. There's a kitchen down the hall, and you can have dinner whenever you're ready. We also have counselors who can talk with you if you need someone to listen." She paused, her eyes kind but firm. "Emma, you're not alone anymore." Emma felt tears sting her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Grace gave a soft smile. "Rest today. Tomorrow, we'll talk more about next steps." After Grace left, Alex climbed onto his bed and pulled the blanket around his shoulders. Emma sat beside him and brushed his hair back. "Is this home now?" he asked. "For now," Emma said. "But we'll find something even better. This is just the beginning." Alex's gaze softened, and he rested his head against her. Emma held him close, letting herself breathe in the quiet safety of the moment. Later, as they unpacked, Alex pulled out the framed photo of Jack. He stared at it for a moment before handing it to Emma. "He'd be proud of you," Alex said. Emma swallowed the lump in her throat as she placed the photo on the dresser. The sight of Jack's warm smile brought both comfort and pain, but the memories no longer felt like chains. Instead, they were reminders of how far they had come. The hum of voices drifted from the hallway, other women and children settling into their rooms, finding their way to new lives. Emma closed her eyes and whispered a silent thank you to Grace, to Jack, and to the strength she hadn't known she had until now. For the first time in a long while, she felt like they were no longer surviving, but moving towards something better. She and Alex had taken the first step, and it had led them somewhere safe. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but they wouldn't face them alone. The first night at the shelter was quiet, though sleep came slowly for Emma. She lay awake, listening to Alex's soft breathing as he slept beside her. The dim light of the small lamp cast a warm glow over his face, smoothing away the tension that had lived there for so long. He looked peaceful, the weight of their old life momentarily lifted from his small shoulders. Emma stared at the ceiling, letting the events of the past few days settle into place. She had left. She had done it. The thought felt surreal, like she was standing on the edge of something vast and new. There was still fear beneath the relief fear of what would come next, of what David might do when he realized they were gone, but for the first time in years, she felt something stronger than fear. Hope. The morning sunlight spilled through the narrow window, pale but bright enough to make Emma blink awake. She rubbed her eyes and sat up, feeling the soreness in her body from the emotional exhaustion of the day before. Alex was still curled under the blanket, his hand clutching the edge as if afraid the safety would vanish if he let go. Emma brushed his hair gently. "Good morning, sweetheart," she whispered. Alex stirred, blinking at her. His gaze shifted around the room as though reminding himself where they were. Then he nodded. "Good morning, Mom." There was no rush in their morning routine for once, no clattering keys, no hurried footsteps, no walking on eggshells to avoid setting off David's temper. Emma let Alex sleep a bit longer while she dressed and walked down the hall to the small kitchen area Grace had mentioned. The kitchen was simple but welcoming, with a long counter lined with fresh fruit, cereal, and a pot of coffee that filled the room with a comforting aroma. A few other women were seated at the tables, some with children, others by themselves. One woman with a baby on her hip gave Emma a small smile as she poured her coffee. Emma returned the smile and poured a cup for herself. The warmth spread through her hands, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel the constant tightness in her chest. Grace appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand, her kind eyes scanning the room until she spotted Emma. "Good morning," she greeted, walking over. Emma set her cup down. "Good morning." "How are you and Alex settling in?" Grace asked, pulling out a chair. Emma hesitated, unsure how to answer. "It feels strange, but in a good way. He slept better than I've seen in months." Grace nodded, her expression softening. "That's a good sign. You've given him what he needed most: safety." She paused for a moment, then continued. "We'll be starting the intake process today. It's nothing overwhelming, just a conversation about your needs and the support we can offer." Emma nodded, grateful for the gentle way Grace approached everything. "What kind of support?" she asked. "Several things," Grace replied. "We'll assign you a caseworker who can help with housing applications, legal aid, and financial planning. There's also counseling available for both you and Alex, so you have someone to talk to. And when you're ready, we'll work on setting up more permanent housing." The words felt like a lifeline. Emma hadn't realized how much she needed someone to help guide her through all the chaos. "Thank you," she whispered. Grace reached out and placed a comforting hand on Emma's arm. "You're not alone anymore. We're here to help you rebuild." Emma's eyes stung with tears, but she blinked them back. She couldn't fall apart, not yet. She needed to stay strong for Alex. Later that morning, after breakfast, Emma returned to their room to find Alex sitting cross-legged on his bed, flipping through a worn library book. He glanced up when she entered, his face curious. "Who was that lady you were talking to?" he asked. "Her name is Grace," Emma said, as she sat beside him. "She's the one who helped us get here." Alex closed his book, fiddling with the corner of the page. "Is she going to help us find a new home?" Emma nodded. "Yes, mijo. She's going to help us with everything, finding a place to live, making sure you're safe at school, and even helping me with my job." Alex leaned against her shoulder. "I like her," he said softly. "Me too," Emma replied, wrapping her arm around him. They sat like that for a few quiet moments before Grace knocked gently on the open door. "Ready, Emma?" Emma nodded and stood, smoothing her shirt. "I'll be back soon, sweetheart." Alex gave a small wave, settling back onto the bed with his book. The intake meeting took place in a small office down the hall. A woman named Diana, the caseworker assigned to Emma, sat across from her with a reassuring smile. Diana had warm brown eyes and spoke with a calm, measured voice that made Emma feel at ease. Diana began with simple questions about their living situation, their routines, and their immediate needs. Emma answered each question honestly, though it felt strange to lay her life out so openly. "How long have you been experiencing this type of control and fear at home?" Diana asked gently. Emma's gaze drifted to the window. "Almost 3 years," she admitted, "since I married David." Diana nodded without judgment. "And what finally made you decide to leave?" Emma took a deep breath. "Alex," she said, "I saw what it was doing to him. He deserves better." Diana's smile was soft but knowing. "You're right. And by leaving, you've already taken the hardest step." She handed Emma a folder filled with information about housing, counseling, and legal aid. "This is where we begin. You don't have to do this alone anymore." Emma felt something loosen in her chest, a fragile, cautious belief that things could truly change. When she returned to the room, Alex looked up from his book. "How did it go?" he asked. Emma sat beside him and smiled. "It went well. They're going to help us with everything." Alex studied her face for a moment, before nodding. "Good." That evening, they sat at one of the long tables in the kitchen, eating dinner alongside other families. Emma watched as Alex chatted quietly with another boy who was building a small tower out of breadsticks. Laughter bubbled up between them, a sound she hadn't heard in too long. Emma leaned back in her chair, letting the warmth of the room wrap around her. Grace's words echoed in her mind. "You're not alone anymore." For the first time, Emma believed it. The days at the shelter passed slowly, but steadily. For the first time in years, Emma felt like she could breathe without fear weighing down her chest. The routines at the shelter were simple, but comforting: breakfasts shared with other families, quiet afternoons spent reading or resting, and the occasional hum of children's laughter echoing down the halls. Alex was adjusting in his quiet, thoughtful way. He spent time in the common room where other children gathered to play board games or read. He was cautious at first, but over time, Emma noticed the small changes: the way his shoulders relaxed, the soft laughs that escaped when someone made a joke. Seeing him open up again made her heart swell with relief. One afternoon, as Emma sat in their room folding laundry, Grace knocked lightly on the open door and stepped inside. "Hi, Emma. Do you have a minute?" Grace asked, holding a folder under her arm. Emma stood, brushing her hands on her jeans. "Of course." Grace motioned to the small chair by the dresser. "I have some updates for you. Diana has found a few housing options. They're temporary, but they're more private than the shelter and should feel more like home." Emma sat down, her heart picking up speed. "Already?" Grace nodded. "You've been diligent, and everything is moving along. There's also a potential meeting with a legal advocate next week to discuss getting a more permanent custody and protection arrangement in place." Emma felt a wave of gratitude, but also a ripple of nerves. The idea of facing David in court, of reliving everything in front of strangers, felt overwhelming. But the alternative, returning to that life, was unthinkable. Grace seemed to sense Emma's hesitation. "You don't have to do everything at once," she said gently. "One step at a time. You've already done so much." Emma nodded slowly, holding on to those words. "Where is the housing option?" Grace pulled out a paper from her folder. "It's a small 2-bedroom apartment near a park. The rent is covered by a housing assistance program for the first 6 months. It will give you time to get on your feet." Emma blinked down at the address. She could almost picture it, a place of their own, where she and Alex could hang up curtains they picked out together, where laughter wouldn't have to be muffled. That evening, over dinner, Emma shared the news with Alex. They sat at a small corner table in the kitchen, the smell of warm stew filling the air. Alex's eyes widened as she explained. We might get our own apartment? Emma nodded, her smile soft. Yes, mijo. It's not big, but it'll be just us. Alex's face brightened with excitement, but then his expression dimmed slightly. What if David tries to find us? Emma reached across the table and took his hand. We're going to have a protective order in place. He won't be able to come near us. And we have people on our side now, Grace, Diana, and the legal team. We're not alone anymore. Alex nodded slowly, but his eyes were still uncertain. Emma gave his hand a reassuring squeeze. You're safe, she said. I promise. Alex let out a small breath, his shoulders finally relaxing. Can we get a plant? Like the one we saw in the cafe window? Emma's smile grew. We can get as many plants as you want. The next few days passed quickly as Emma prepared for the move. The shelter staff helped her pack their things, mostly clothes, a few books, and the framed photo of Jack that Alex always kept close. On moving day, Grace stood by the door, clipboard in hand, offering last-minute instructions and encouragement. You've done something brave, Emma, she said. You've taken control of your life, and Alex is going to remember that strength. Emma's throat tightened. Thank you, Grace. I couldn't have done this without you. Grace smiled warmly. You just needed someone to remind you of your strength. The new apartment was small but clean, with wide windows that let in the afternoon sun. The walls were bare, but Emma saw potential in every corner. The kitchen was tiny but bright, and the living room had enough space for a small couch and a table. Alex ran from room to room, his laughter bouncing off the walls. Mom, look, we can put bookshelves over here, he said, pointing to a corner by the window. Emma laughed as she watched him, feeling the same lightness he did. We can, she agreed. And maybe we can find a rug for the living room. Alex paused for a moment, taking it all in. Then he walked over and hugged her tightly. Thank you, he whispered. Emma blinked back tears and hugged him back. No, thank you, she whispered, for believing in me. That night, after they had unpacked the basics, Emma made them a simple dinner of rice and vegetables. They ate at the small kitchen table they had brought from the shelter, their chairs close together. The apartment was still quiet, but it wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence they had known before it was peaceful. After dinner, Alex pulled out a notebook and sat by the window, drawing what looked like constellations. Emma watched him for a moment, her heart full. You're drawing the stars? She asked. Alex nodded, his pencil moving across the page. Dad used to say the stars made everything feel smaller, he said, like even big problems couldn't be bigger than the sky. Emma swallowed hard, Jack's words weaving their way back into her heart. He was right, she said. The sky is always there, no matter what. Alex smiled up at her, and for the first time in a long while, Emma felt like they weren't just surviving, they were living. They had a home. They had each other. And they had a future filled with possibilities. The next morning, sunlight poured through the apartment windows, casting a warm glow across the small living room floor. Emma woke to the soft hum of the city outside and the comforting quiet of their new home. For a moment, she lay still, letting the peace settle over her. The faint scent of coffee brewing reminded her that she wasn't in the cramped, suffocating apartment with David anymore. She got up quietly and tiptoed to the kitchen, where Alex was already sitting at the small table, his notebook open in front of him. He had drawn more constellations, small, careful stars connected by thin pencil lines. His eyes were focused, his tongue peeking out at the corner of his mouth in concentration. "Good morning, stargazer," Emma said with a smile. Alex looked up and grinned. "Morning, Mom. I thought of a name for our plant when we get one." Emma poured herself a cup of coffee. "Oh, what is it?" Alex leaned forward, his blue eyes shining. "Cosmo. You know, like the cosmos." Emma laughed softly. "I love it. We'll pick out a plant this weekend, and you can give it a proper introduction." Alex's excitement made the space between them feel warm and safe, like an invisible shield against the memories they were slowly leaving behind. By mid-morning, Emma was ready for her second shift at the cafe. She slipped into her neat blouse and apron, feeling a mix of nerves and determination. Lisa had called the night before to tell her how impressed she was with Emma's first day, which had been enough to quiet some of Emma's lingering doubts. As Emma zipped her bag, Alex spoke from the table. "You're going to do great again today." Emma smiled. "Thanks, sweetheart. I'll be back before dinner, and we'll plan something fun for the weekend." Alex nodded, giving her a small but encouraging wave. Emma leaned down and kissed his forehead before heading out the door. The walk to the cafe felt different now. The weight that had once hung over her had lifted. She no longer felt like she was rushing through life just to survive now. She was moving forward with purpose. When she arrived, Lisa greeted her with a nod and an approving smile. "Morning, Emma. You ready for the morning crowd?" Emma tied her apron tighter and nodded. "Absolutely." The cafe filled quickly as the morning rush began. Emma moved efficiently from customer to customer, taking orders, pouring coffee, and chatting with regulars. The hum of conversation and the hiss of the espresso machine created a comforting background noise. At one point, an elderly man in a wool coat fumbled with his coins as he tried to pay for his coffee. Emma noticed and stepped forward with a kind smile. "It's okay, take your time." The man's face softened with relief. "Thank you, dear. These old hands don't work like they used to." Emma handed him his coffee and added an extra cookie to his order. "This one's on me," she said. The man's eyes lit up. "That's very kind of you." She nodded, feeling a quiet sense of pride. Small acts of kindness, the kind Jack used to show to strangers, had a way of making the world feel lighter. Lisa observed from the register, her sharp eyes softening. As the morning rush slowed, she approached Emma and tapped her shoulder lightly. "You're a natural with people," Lisa said. "That's a gift, Emma. I want to offer you more hours, maybe even a full-time position if you're interested." Emma blinked in surprise. "Full-time?" Lisa nodded. "You've earned it. We could use someone like you." Emma's heart swelled with pride and disbelief. "Thank you. I'd love that." Lisa smiled and gave her a pat on the shoulder. "You've come a long way already. Keep it up." Emma's eyes stung with unshed tears as Lisa walked back to the register. It wasn't just a job, it was a step toward independence, toward building a life she could be proud of. When Emma returned home that evening, she found Alex in the living room, a new drawing spread across the floor. He had drawn their apartment, complete with the bookshelves and the spot where their future plant, Cosmo, would sit. "Guess what?" Emma said, setting her bag down. Alex sat up eagerly. "What?" Emma knelt beside him. "I'm getting more hours at the cafe. Full-time. Soon." Alex's face lit up. "Really? That's amazing, Mom." Emma smiled and pulled him into a hug. "It means we're one step closer to everything we've dreamed about. And it's because we didn't give up." Alex hugged her tightly, and Emma felt the strength of his small arms around her, the strength that had kept them both going through the hardest moments. That night, as they sat together on the couch watching an old movie, Emma found herself staring at the framed photo of Jack on the small bookshelf. His warm, familiar smile seemed to glow in the lamplight. Alex noticed and gave her a small nudge. "Do you think Dad would be proud of us?" Emma's eyes softened. "I know he would." She placed a hand on Alex's shoulder. "He always believed in us, and we're finally building the life he would have wanted for us." Alex's expression grew thoughtful as he leaned against her. "I wish he could see this place." Emma nodded, her heart full of both longing and peace. "Me too," she whispered, "but in a way, he's still with us." Outside, the city lights twinkled in the distance, like stars scattered across the sky. Emma remembered Jack's voice. "The stars are always there, no matter what happens below." For the first time, Emma truly believed it. The weekend arrived with a soft autumn breeze that swept through the open window, ruffling the curtains. The sky was a bright, endless blue, and the crisp air carried the sound of children playing in the park nearby. Emma stood at the small kitchen counter, carefully watering the plant she and Alex had picked out of vibrant pothos with glossy green leaves. "Cosmo looks happy," Alex said as he walked in, still in his pajamas, holding his drawing notebook under one arm. Emma smiled as she placed the plant near the window where the sunlight pooled. "I think he likes it here." Alex grinned and took a seat at the table. "I do too." His words warmed Emma's heart more than anything else. After everything they had been through, Alex was finally finding his footing in this new life, safe, steady, and free from fear. She poured them both a glass of orange juice and sat beside him. "What do you want to do today?" she asked. Alex thought for a moment. "Can we go to the park?" "I want to practice soccer." Emma nodded. "Of course." She reached out and ruffled his hair. "We'll make a whole day of it." Alex's face lit up. "Can we get hot chocolate after?" "Deal," Emma said with a laugh. The park was alive with the sounds of weekend joy. Families gathered at picnic tables. Friends tossed frisbees across the grass, and children raced each other along the winding paths. Alex ran ahead, his soccer ball tucked under his arm, his blonde curls bouncing in the sunlight. Emma followed at a leisurely pace, letting herself enjoy the moment. She found a bench near the field and watched as Alex kicked the ball across the grass, practicing his dribbles and passes. He looked so free, his face flushed with happiness. The sight filled Emma with pride and a quiet sense of victory. "Mind if I join?" a cheerful voice called out. Emma turned to see a boy about Alex's age approach with a soccer ball under his arm. Alex paused and smiled. "Sure." The boy introduced himself as Sam, and soon the two of them were running across the field, kicking the ball back and forth. Emma watched with a smile as they laughed and traded playful shouts. A few minutes later, a woman holding a cup of coffee approached the bench and sat down beside Emma. "That's my son, Sam," she said, nodding toward the field. "He's been looking for a soccer buddy." Emma smiled warmly. "I'm glad they found each other. I'm Emma, by the way." The woman extended her hand. "I'm Rachel." The two women sat in companionable silence for a moment, watching their boys play. Rachel glanced over. "Are you new to the neighborhood?" Emma hesitated for a second, then nodded. "Yes, we just moved into a place nearby." Rachel's eyes softened. "Well, welcome. I know how hard it can be to start over somewhere new, but you seem to be doing a wonderful job." Emma's chest tightened at the kindness in Rachel's voice. She had grown so used to walking through life guarded, waiting for the next storm. That simple kindness felt like something rare and precious. "Thank you," Emma said softly. Rachel smiled and took a sip of her coffee. "We come to the park every weekend. You and Alex should join us sometime." Emma felt a flicker of warmth. "We'd like that." After an hour of playing, Alex ran back to Emma, his cheeks flushed and his hair damp with sweat. "Mom, did you see my goal?" he asked breathlessly. Emma laughed and wrapped her arms around him. "I saw everything. You were amazing." Alex beamed. "Sam said we should come back next weekend. Can we?" "Of course," Emma said. They said their goodbyes to Rachel and Sam before heading to the nearby cafe for hot chocolate. The cafe was cozy, with warm wooden tables and the comforting scent of cinnamon and cocoa in the air. Alex sat at the window, sipping his hot chocolate and gazing out at the street with a contented smile. Emma watched him, her heart full. There was no fear in his eyes now, only wonder and hope. "You know," Emma said as she took a sip from her mug, "you remind me of your dad when you're out there on the field." Alex looked up, curious. "Why?" Emma smiled, her gaze distant with memory. "He was always calm and steady, even when things got tough. But when he played soccer, he lit up like everything else disappeared, and he could just be himself." Alex's expression softened. I wish I could have played with him. Emma reached across the table and took his hand. He would have loved that, but I think he'd be even prouder of how brave you've been. Alex's eyes shimmered with quiet pride. I've been brave because of you. Emma's breath caught in her throat, but she managed to smile. We've been brave together, mijo. When they returned home, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the living room floor. Alex kicked off his shoes and flopped onto the couch, grabbing his notebook to sketch more constellations. Emma walked over to the bookshelf, her eyes drifting to the photo of Jack. Hey, Jack, she whispered, placing a hand on the frame. We're okay. We're finally okay. The faint sound of Alex humming to himself filled the room, a sound so ordinary, yet so profound in its simplicity. Emma let herself soak in the moment, the quiet hum of a life rebuilt, the warmth of safety and love filling every corner of their new home. As the sky outside deepened into twilight, Emma sat down beside Alex on the couch. He leaned against her shoulder, his notebook resting in his lap. What do you think our next adventure will be? Alex asked, his voice soft with sleepiness. Emma wrapped an arm around him and smiled. Whatever it is, we'll face it together. Alex's eyes closed, his breathing slowing into the soft rhythm of sleep. Emma pressed a gentle kiss to his hair and let herself sink into the peace of the moment. They had come so far from fear and uncertainty to hope and belonging, and as the stars began to glimmer in the night sky, Emma knew that they had carved out a new life, one that Jack would be proud of. They had weathered the storms. Now it was their time to bask in the dawn of something new. Thank you for joining Emma and Alex on their journey of resilience, hope, and new beginnings. Their story reminds us that even in the darkest moments, kindness and courage can lead to brighter days. No matter the challenges we face, we can rebuild and find joy again, step by step, with the people who matter most. If you found their story inspiring, we invite you to be part of our community. Please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt stories of perseverance and hope. Your support helps us share stories that inspire change and remind us all of the power of resilience, compassion, and love. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story. Subscribe now and never miss an update.